Hi, welcome to my podcast, Reclaim. I am your host, Thaís Sky. I have supported women navigate the complexities of being human for over 10 years. This podcast is where I disseminate some of those learnings and offer thoughts and guests to guide you into your healing. Welcome. Hello, beautiful humans. Thaís Sky here. Welcome to the final part of my new series, Talk Therapy, How to Get the Help You Need. This is it. Mental Health Awareness Month is done. We are officially in June territory, and part 5 of this series feels like a great way to complete the series for now. I already have a list of episodes that I want to record for future parts of this series. But for now, this feels really complete. And it feels like a good place to end talking to the professionals in the field. So this episode is particularly for those of you who are considering going into the mental health field, or more specifically, considering becoming a psychotherapist. I want to share with you the ins and outs of my journey, what I've learned, what I wish I knew, the steps, the process, because I knew surprisingly little going into this. And in preparation for this episode, I did an abundance of research online, and the information that you find online just doesn't really cut it. A lot of it feels like misinformation. It feels like it's not complete. It feels frustrating. And so this episode is supposed to be, or is meant to be, my intention for this is a peek into someone who is going through it, who is doing it with my own experience. This is not everybody's experience. That's obvious. I do not speak for everyone in the field. That's also maybe obvious. And I'm certainly not an expert in every facet of this field, but I am definitively an expert of my own experience. I know what I know. This journey has been a beautiful, 4-year journey now? 2018, 3-year journey now. So I know a little bit, and I want to share the little bit I know with you all, in hopes to guide you into this decision of whether or not going back to grad school, whether or not getting your master's, whether or not going to become a psychotherapist, getting your PsyD or a PhD, whether all of that is useful for you. Now, you by no means have had to listen to the other parts of the series in order to kind of get the most out of this episode. However, previous episodes do give you a lay of the land, at least through my perspective of the lay of the land, and that definitively informs, my perspective comes from my experience, and so a lot of how you hear me think about and talk about the world of mental health stems from what I'm about to share with you. So it may be useful for you to listen to those episodes as well. Okay, so I asked you all on social media to give me your questions of what you want to hear from this episode. And I collected many of your questions, and I'm going to weave it in a section called Before, During, and After. Before I went to grad school, during grad school, and after grad school, and kind of paint a picture of what it was like going into it, how it was during it, and how it was after it. And hopefully through that structure, I will be answering all of the questions that I have received from you all. If you do have any other questions for me, you're more than welcome to message me, and I will do my best to answer it. Okay? You can also email me at info@thaissky.com. Okay, let's talk about before. What was my life like before I went to grad school? Why did I go to grad school? How did I decide on my master's in clinical psychology, etc.? Okay, so I have been a coach since 2010. Maybe you know this from my podcast. I share about this pretty openly, but I've been a coach. My work has shifted and evolved over the 10 years that I've been a coach. But I was squarely in the world of women's empowerment, so to speak. And really, really enjoying it. I moved to California in 2015. That's when I went into my business full time. Previous to that, it was all part-time. I was also a yoga teacher, meditation teacher. And so when I moved to LA, I devoted full time to my work as a life coach, of building this women's empowerment brand, of building this this methodology, this way of healing. I cultivated this idea called the worthiness wound that is the foundation of my work as it is today. All of that has happened over the past, 6 years. And the thing was, much of the work that I have done with my clients up till 2018 was really grounded in my own work and my work in my own healing. I took some courses, some certifications, NLP, that kind of like the big things that the coaching industry kind of pushes. But so much of it was really intuitive, really grounded in the books that I was reading, but mostly my own experience. And it felt ethical because I was very conscious of, it felt ethical. I don't know if looking back, I would say that it's ethical. I know plenty of people who do what I did. And I don't know if it is the most ethical thing because we don't know what we don't know. And I don't know. I don't know. But I just was starting to rub up against the edges of feeling a little bit irresponsible. The idea of trauma was becoming more and more popularized at that point in time. More and more coaches were kind of leaning towards this idea of doing trauma work or being trauma informed. And I was doing trauma work. I do trauma work. Your clients, if you're a coach, your clients are going to come to you with all of who they are. And sometimes that involves past trauma. And so while I was feeling like I was doing really good work and I felt like I was really responsible and I felt like I was really grounded in what works and very intuitive, I just also kept getting this nagging sense of, I want to be more responsible. I want to learn more. And so my partner at the time was getting his PhD in organizational psychology. And so I was seeing him going through school and it was inspiring me to maybe think about going back and getting my master's. I had a really difficult time in undergrad and I'm still paying off those student loans. And I really regretted the way in which I did my undergrad. I got my undergrad degree in business. And I don't know, I think that 18 is too young to make these types of decisions and to go into the type of debt that I went into. So I was really reluctant to go back to school and take on more student debt. I was really worried that I wasn't going to learn what I wanted to learn, that I was going to be entering a really antiquated field, that life coaching is at the cutting edge. It's doing really cutting edge work, and that going back and getting my master's would only teach me about antiquated methodologies that no one's doing anymore. So there were some pretty valid concerns going into it. My friend Lindsay Ray was also thinking about going and getting her master's. So we were kind of talking about it together a lot and really thinking about it. And we decided to go to a couple open houses of grad schools here in Los Angeles. And I ended up going into just one, and it was for this school called Antioch University. And Antioch is based out of Ohio, but they have satellite campuses all over the country. They have one in Seattle and they have one here in LA. And they're very well known for their master's in clinical psychology program. They're one of the most popular programs in Los Angeles. So that was a bonus. That was a benefit to going to Antioch, is that, I'm going to leave Antioch with like a community of other Antiochians, right? Like I'm going to leave and see people in the field and be like, oh, you went to Antioch? I went to Antioch, right? Like it's a well-known school. So I went to their open house, and I just sometimes get it in my head that I'm going to do something and then I just do it and I don't think too much about it. And this could be a good thing. It's what propelled me to move across the country and quit my full-time job and go into coaching full-time and live in LA. So there's something really wonderful about this kind of impulsivity. But there's also something slightly dangerous about it, where you're not really thinking it through. And if you're not really giving yourself enough space to think it through, you don't really know what you're deciding on, right? And so after that open house, I kind of just knew. I just went for it. I just applied. I got an interview. I got in. And in a matter of 3 months, I applied and then accepted and started grad school. End of March, April of 2018. So I don't recommend the Thaís method. I think in retrospect, I would have really thought about it, thought about what type of program I really wanted, thought about the amount of debt. There are other programs in LA that's a little bit more affordable, a little harder to get into, but in some ways more affordable. And I thought maybe I should have looked into that. But it just kind of all ended out working out. I met my now husband, in orientation of grad school, and it kind of just all went from there. So that's kind of like the broad brushstrokes way in which I found myself in grad school in March of 2018. Before that point, I was obviously focused full time on building my coaching practice, and I was getting successful, but I certainly wasn't at the point that it was sustainable. I was still very much not making enough to cover my debts. I was still very much in the building phase. And so going back to grad school felt like in some ways a risk, because now I was accruing more debt and I wasn't even fully grounded in my business yet, like fully kind of making it and feeling like it was consistent. But it just also felt like another way in which I could anchor my work in something more real. I've always been aware that I've built something out of nothing. To build a coaching practice requires a particular type of gumption that's unrecognized in the world. The coaching industry isn't really understood by people outside of the industry. And I built something out of nothing. Now a successful 6-figure, perpetual 5-figure month business, but it's built purely out of my own confidence and desire to do this healing work for people. And I've just always been a little bit afraid of like what happens when this coaching industry bubble bursts, because there's so many people that's doing irresponsible work. And when I thought about my life in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, when I was 50 years old, did I still want to be considered a life coach? And to be frank, like that didn't excite me. I didn't think I wanted to be 60 years old and coaching, not to say anything about 60-year-olds who coach. It felt like for me, because I started in the coaching industry in my early 20s, that where was the trajectory of growth? Where would I grow? Is my only growth in terms of building a business? And that's never felt that satisfying to me. I like building my business, but I don't consider myself an entrepreneur, right? Like I consider myself a practitioner doing something I love, and my business is how that gets supported. And so part of the decision of going back to grad school was psychotherapy is a well-known, established profession. It works. Talk therapy works. I've built this argument over the past 4 parts of this series, and it felt like a pathway to growth. That if I was 60 years old and I was doing psychotherapy, that it would feel like an accomplishment. It would feel like a level of growth that I was confident in. Many could argue otherwise, and this is a very individualized decision, and that's just where I was at the time, how I made this decision. Okay, so that's kind of what I was thinking. I was like, I want to be known for more than just being a coach. Like, I want to have credentials behind my name. Credentials matter in this world as much as we say it doesn't matter. And in some ways it doesn't. In some ways it does. And I wanted to feel like I wasn't going into this master's program wanting validation for my work, but I wanted just to have a little bit more buffer that if anybody came knocking, I could say, oh, and I have this. The degree is not going to give you an easy path to success by no means, but it does establish yourself as more valid. And it's an unfortunate world. I think that's very problematic for accessibility reasons. And this is also the world we live in. So I decided I wanted to go back and get my master's. Now, why I decided to do a master's instead of a PsyD or PhD program, great question. I don't have the answer to. I didn't even really know, like, again, my partner at the time got his master's, and his PhD program was a master's and PhD program all in one. So I knew that it was possible, but I just didn't want to do that intense of a commitment. I just wanted my next step and to do my master's, see how it goes, and then maybe go back and get a PsyD. I think in retrospect, I would have looked a little bit more deeply into dual programs, PsyD master's programs, and really seeing how much the time difference would have made a difference, because there is a part of me that really likes the idea of being called Dr. Thaís. But I don't regret going straight for a master's program, and a PsyD may still be in my future. I don't know. I'll talk about that in the after. Okay, so why did I do an MFT instead of a social work degree? This is a big one, and I've gotten many people asking me this question. Why did I choose a master's in clinical psychology? Why did I choose an MFT program? Here's the thing. Where you live in the world, and particularly if you're in the US, in what state you live in really matters, because when it comes to psychotherapy, the board is state-based. Every state in the country has different rules and regulations and boards that oversee the industry. There is not a national licensure. It just doesn't exist yet. And that's problematic for many reasons. But right now, my license only extends into the state of California. And I've talked about this before in previous episodes, but you are not legally allowed to practice psychotherapy with your patients who are outside of your state. There are some exceptions. It's very rare, but it is ethically and legally not the okay. You're not supposed to do that. Some people have multiple state licensures, especially if you live on the East Coast where the states are more smushy together. I think if I got my license in Maryland, I would probably also look at what it would look like to get a license in Virginia, because, again, in Pennsylvania, these states are so close together. But in California, I mean, the states are really far apart. But my licensure is only for the state of California. If I want to practice in New York, I would have to look at getting my license in New York. Some states play very nicely together and they make that process easy. Some states are not very nice and don't play that practice that way. They don't mix very well. And that's where it's really important for you to think about your future goals for this work. There are some licensures, like licensed professional counselor, or PCC. I don't even know what that stands for off the top of my head. Some people choose to do that licensure in the state of California because it's easier to then get your LPCC extended into other states. Some people do that. California is the first state to create an MFT program. They are the ones that started the whole MFT situation. So MFTs is what's most popular here in this state. Most psychotherapists are MFTs, not social workers. They didn't get their degree in social work. They got their degree in clinical psychology. Or they call the masters different. Some call it masters in marriage and family therapy. I mean, the name doesn't really matter. All programs, all grad programs, what you need to be looking at is how does it prepare you for licensure? If the program is not fitting into the specific curriculum that the licensure requires, because in order to get your licensure, they require that you take certain classes. Programs that know this will create their curriculum accordingly. Antioch, their program is specifically designed to meet the requirements for an MFT licensure, marriage family therapist licensure. So I didn't have to worry in my courses whether those courses would help me get my license. If I wanted to get an LPCC, I would have had to take additional classes at Antioch in order for me to go for that additional license so that I could be both an MFT and a PCC. There are social work programs in the state of California that guide you to get your MFT. So it's not either or. A social work degree isn't, it doesn't mean that you can't then get an MFT license. Yes? Okay. Or you can also get your social work license. It really depends on what you want to do. Okay. So when you're thinking about which program do you go to, there's a couple things to think about. First, you have to think about where you want to practice and what is most popular and accessible in your state. Are you going to move eventually? If you know that you want to end up in New York, look to see what New York does. My very rudimentary understanding is that there are way more social workers in New York than there are in California, because of how the degree looks. You'll want to be considering this because it would be a bitch and a half for you to get your license and then move and then realize you have to start over. I really don't know what this specific process looks like because I knew that I was going to be practicing in the state of California. So this is not coming from experience. This is coming from what I've heard. And you have to do that research and deciding and looking into your state. What is your license state? Yes? Okay, I paused the recording there to take a look, and now I'm questioning myself, y'all. I really don't know if you can get an MFT license with a social work master's. I think if you have a social work master's, you get, I know you get an LCSW, you get a license in social work. I don't think that you can get a master's in social work and then go for an MFT. I could be wrong. I'm so sorry. This is a little bit outside of my awareness. I really don't know much about the difference between a master's in clinical psychology and a master's in social work. The internet is such a wild place and everything says something different. And I have many friends who've gotten their master's in social work and they've said to me that the things that you find on the internet isn't their experience. For example, everywhere on the internet, you'll see that an MFT guides you to do direct interventions with the focus on the family as a treatment unit. I took one class on family therapy. 2 classes on family therapy in my grad school. 2 classes. I've never done family therapy. I've literally never sat in front of a family and done therapy. And yet my degree says marriage family therapy. Isn't that wild? I do couples work. I don't know why it's called marriage. Couples and marriage is totally different, right? Like not all couples are married. That doesn't make their coupling any less valid or whatever. I do some couples work, but it's a very small sliver of my work. The majority of my work is individuals. And yet my degree is called marriage family therapy. It is so wild. Anyway, online, often what you'll find is that it says that MFT specializes in psychotherapy, master's in social work, social workers focuses on public policy, community work, as well as therapy. But I have plenty of friends who did their master's in social work, who did a clinical route, who did maybe one additional class in public policy. That's it. So it's a little hard, right? I'm looking at a website right now that says that licensed marriage family therapists make less than licensed social workers. And yet I know plenty of people who make the same amount. So it's really confusing. I get it. And I wish I had all the information on all the different states and all the different programs and tell you which one's the best for you. But I really don't. There is a social work program at USC that I looked at and thought about applying to. If I had done that, my route to licensure would have been roughly the same, except that I think social workers require a little bit more hours to get their license than MFTs. But the practice would ultimately be the same. So it's a little confusing, and I'm sorry about that. I can't alleviate that confusion because it really is so state dependent. Let me think if there's anything else that I want to talk about in this. It could be helpful if you look at schools for you to look at the curriculum and to compare the curriculum and see the difference between a master's and that will take you the clinical psych route versus a master's in social work and just see what the different classes are. That may help you guide the difference. There are, again, some states where social workers are everywhere. Some places there's counselors everywhere. And in the state of California, because we're the ones that created the MFT program, there are MFTs everywhere. And that is important too, right? Like what the state is predominantly known for is going to be more useful for you in terms of getting social support, in terms of promoting yourself, getting jobs, etc., especially if you're getting a job that's outside of a private practice. Okay, let me think here. Okay, the next kind of thing is like, what did I anticipate going into grad school? Again, because I kind of jumped in with like 2 feet in and didn't really think about it, I didn't know what I was really anticipating. I think I just wanted to learn. I wanted to expand my knowledge. I wanted to have fun. And I wanted to give myself more focus. Something that I've struggled with as a business owner is that sometimes it just felt like I didn't have focus outside of just like launching things. And I wanted to give myself a little bit more structure, and grad school definitely did that. Now, the cool thing about Antioch is that they had 3 different options. You could do a weekend cohort, you could do a weekday cohort, or you can pick and choose any classes that you want as long as you meet the requirements. A cohort just means that you go through your entire 2-year program with the same people on either Thursdays or Saturdays. You go to school every Thursday and they pick the classes for you and you just go along with it with your cohort. My friend Lindsay and I, we started school together. We decided that we wanted to do the Saturday cohort, which meant that we were in school 1 day a week, all day Saturdays. We had 3 to 4 classes every Saturday. Plus we took a couple additional classes depending on the quarter, on Sundays or during the weekdays. But our predominant class days was Saturdays. And this is nice if you if you work full time. I mean, it's a lot, but it makes it more doable. And this type of professional degree was very alluring to me because I wanted to be with other professionals. Whereas some places like USC, it's not so much a professional school as much as it's an extension of their undergrad. So it's a younger population. And I liked the idea of going into a professional school. Okay, so let's move into the next phase of this episode. Let's talk about during. Now, I applied, I got an interview, I got accepted. It all happened very quickly. My schedule during school, because I was on a Saturday cohort, my weekday didn't change. I worked every day in my business, and then I would go to school all day Saturday, pretty much from 8 a.m. till 5-6 p.m. Pretty grueling, intense days. The program started off more intense, and in some ways, the classes got less intense as I went along. One thing that I did do was I took more. Okay, let me back up. In the MFT curriculum, the way that Antioch had it set up is that you have your core curriculum, and then you had a certain amount of credits that you had to take, but you could choose the classes. Okay, so you had a certain amount of credits of just classes that you had to take. And then there's a third pocket, which is clinical hour credits. A certain amount of clinical hours computes into credits, and you have to get a certain amount of clinical hour credits in order to graduate. So part of an MFT program in California is clinical practice, clinical work. You are going to be doing clinical work in order to graduate from your grad school. So I knew that I wanted more of those credits to go towards my clinical training than to go to classes. I wanted to be in the field. I wanted to be doing my learning through my work rather than being in classes. So I took the minimum amount of classes, but in the first couple quarters, I took a lot more additional classes because you're young, you're excited, you're starting up, everything is fun and fresh. That's when you want to load up in as many classes as you feasibly can. That's, sustainable for you in the beginning, so that by the time you get to the end, you don't have to take the classes. You can coast a little bit, and that's what I ended up doing. So my schedule during school was I would work during the week. I would go to school on a Saturday, an occasional Sunday for those additional classes. The first year of grad school, you are not allowed to do clinical studies. Clinical studies can only happen your second year. So the first year, really focus on loading up on classes, getting through those classes. I spent maybe about 3 to 4 hours a week outside of classes doing schoolwork. Because it was a professional program and it's not a research-based program, we didn't have to do a lot of research paper. What we ended up having to do a lot of was reflection paper, and those are easier to write because you're just kind of reflecting on your experience. Okay, how I did it, and I did my business. Well, luckily, because my classes were on the weekend, it really didn't interfere so much with my actual business until the second year. One thing that I'll tell you what I was surprised by in a minute. Let's get through my list here. Okay, so I chose to get more clinical hours than to use up those credits for classes. Other people do it differently. That's how I chose to do it. Again, because I wanted my learning to be done in the field. So it's important for you to know that part of your grad school requirement is to get a minimum number of clinic hours. They track it. You have to go to a clinic that the school approves of. The school usually has a list of clinics and places that they approve of, but you can do your own additional research. I know some people who are already working at a clinic and a treatment center, they applied to get their treatment center covered by the school. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But this is where things get really hard, particularly those that already have a very tight commitment. Somehow, on top of school, on top of your work, you'll have to find a way to squeeze in 10 to sometimes 20 hours a week in some type of clinic setting to get your clinic hours. My suggestion is that quarter one, you load up with your classes, you focus on classes, but by quarter two, you're already starting to think about where you want to go to get your clinic hours, because the time it happens before you know it. And some clinics, they only interview a couple times a year. And so you want to make sure that you know when those are so you can prepare ahead of time. And I didn't think that the school really supported us in this process. It was really you really had to kind of advocate for yourself and figure it out on your own. So year two, I went to a clinic, community mental health clinic here in Los Angeles, where I fulfilled my requirements. I worked at that clinic. Some clinics have minimum hours that you have to work there at. This clinic had a minimum hours. I don't remember what it was. I want to say it's like maybe 20. So I spent 20 hours doing clinic work there, plus grad school, plus my business. This is when shit started to get really intense. Really, really intense, as you can imagine. You can't do those 20 hours on a weekend. So the only day I had off was Sunday. And then during the week, I had to squeeze in my business and clinic hours. And it just started getting more intense from there. I didn't know, again, because of my 2 feet in, didn't really do research. I didn't realize that clinic hours was a requirement for a master's program. There are plenty of master's program out there where you don't have to do clinic work and then you just get a master's in psychology. I wanted to get a master's in clinical psychology to become a psychotherapist. And that means in order to become a psychotherapist, you have to do clinical hours for your grad program, for the MFT requirement. And so you have to be prepared for it. What really sucks, and this really makes me upset and it feels so frustrating, is when you're getting your clinic hours in grad school. So you're in grad school and you're getting clinic hours, which a certain number of those clinic hours has to be therapy, has to be you doing therapy. You're called a trainee. Okay. That's kind of your title. You're MFT trainee. MFT trainees are not allowed to be paid. You are not allowed to get paid while doing clinic hours while you're in grad school. Isn't that wild? So somehow you have to carve 10 hours, I think is the minimum. Maybe 6 hours is the minimum. I really forget what the minimum hours was. But again, you have to have a minimum number of hours. And I wanted to max that out. So I got to 20. There is a max number that you can get while you're getting your hours for grad school. So there's a minimum hours, but there's also a maximum hours. You're not allowed to get above, I think, 1350 hours during grad school. So you have to get a minimum number of hours. They cannot be paid hours. And so you have to find a clinic that's going to work for you. That's where the most amount of attention needs to be turned in terms of finding something that's right for you. This is it. Your clinic training is the crux of it all. Grad school, the books, the classes, they're a little bit of a joke. I mean, they're just a little bit like, they're not really the bread and butter. They're not really where you're going to learn how to be a psychotherapist. It's really not in the schooling. It's in the clinic training. Yes. Okay. So here's some things that I was surprised by when I entered grad school, like things that I wish I knew that I didn't know. First, I didn't anticipate that the field of mental health, the field of psychotherapy is split by theory. What I mean by that is that I anticipated having a class all about anxiety. And you go into this class and you learn all of the different theories and research and everything there is to know about anxiety. You don't really get that. There are some classes that you get that, like grief or eating disorder. That was an additional class that you could take. You learn a little bit about it. But most of the field is separated by modality. How you understand your client, how you work with your client. Isn't that wild? I didn't know this. So if you are interested in a specific modality, then that is how you, how do I want to say this? Let's say that you're interested in psychodynamic psychotherapy or psychoanalytic psychotherapy, whatever you want to call it. This is what I'm interested in. That is how I learn how to work with people. And I can add in other modalities like CBT, sure. But most of my understanding of people is going to come from my modality. And this can get confusing because what if, for example, I want to learn about narcissism? Well, if you see narcissism from a CBT perspective, you're going to treat it much differently than if you see it from a psychodynamic perspective. Psychodynamic, they may want to understand the root of the narcissism. They may want to understand what's underlying it. How did it get created? What happened in development? What happened in, how is the person seeing the world and really attempting to understand. If you're looking at it from a CBT lens, from a cognitive behavioral therapy lens, then you're more likely looking at the behavior and modifying the behavior, modifying the thoughts that accompany the behavior, and then modifying the feelings that accompany the thoughts. It's a two different perspective. It's two different way of looking at it. And I get that, but I didn't anticipate that going to grad school would mean that I would essentially be learning one over the other. And now, of course, a lot of people choose to see things in a CBT perspective. It's a lot easier. It can be manualized. People don't have to think that hard. And the field, I think, is very much divided by this. Okay, so I didn't anticipate that. And many therapists now kind of consider themselves more eclectic. They go by a variety of different modalities. And the field, I think, is slowly changing, but it's still very much rooted in the modality in which you work will determine how you see your clients and the learning that you'll get. Okay. Didn't anticipate that. I also, when I went into grad school, was really, I thought based on the research that I had read on the internet that I wanted to do cognitive behavioral work, right? I want to understand the cognitions. I want to understand human behavior. But I was very surprised. In quarter one, we took a class called Personality Theory 1, where we learned the history of psychotherapy. And I was just so floored that there's this whole way of working with people called psychodynamic, where it was about the root, it was about the unconscious, it was about trying to understand the behavior from a very different way of looking at the mind. I didn't know any of this. Psychology in undergrad, psychology in high school teaches psychodynamic therapy as this antiquated Freud. It's all about Freud. He was antiquated. Now we're talking about behavioral. Now this is evidence-based. And when I went into grad school and learned that there's actually Freud is not the last psychoanalytic theorist. And in fact, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of contemporary theorists that are attempting to understand the root of a person's suffering that goes beyond just changing their thoughts to change their behavior, which is very mindset work in the coaching industry and I think doesn't work in the coaching industry. And we're seeing that CBT doesn't really create any sustainable lifelong changes in the world of mental health. I fell in love. I fell in love with this idea of psychodynamic psychotherapy. I found it first quarter. This guy that was sitting next to me really liked it, and he comes from a history of having known it. I was starting to really crush on him hard. Turns out he would be my husband 3 years later, but he showed me the world of psychoanalytic psychotherapy, and it just completely changed my entire relationship with this degree, with this path, and what I want to do as a psychotherapist. I think why so many people burn out in the world of therapy is because they're doing short-term work that's not really grounded in the curiosity and exploration of the human behavior. They're all just thinking about how to change a person's symptom. And I think that can easily lead to burnout. And yet in the world of psychodynamic psychotherapy, you see analysts working when they're in their 70s and 80s because this work is so rich and there's so much conversation, there's so much interest and support and understanding what's going on for a particular person in front of you. And it's so cool how when you are surrounded by people who are really interested, it really nourishes you. The learning part of being a psychoanalytic psychotherapist is what feeds you and helps to prevent burnout that I think we're seeing in the field when we're doing short-term manualized therapy. So I was completely surprised by this. I didn't know there was this at all. I thought Freud was old, he's irrelevant, he talked about children and sex, and now it's all about like trauma work. But there's actually something so much richer if we can open our minds and get curious about psychoanalytic psychotherapy. It's also very difficult to do this work. There's no how to. There's no this is what you do when this comes up. It's much more nuanced, complicated work that I've been getting extensive training in it now for 3 years, and I'm still just beginning to wrap my mind around. And I think for those of us who want to go into becoming a psychotherapist because we want it to be easier, then we may find that CBT is what we gravitate towards, rather something more like psychodynamic psychotherapy. Okay. I was also surprised by how little I actually learned in the classroom. You know, the first quarter I came in with all of my books and I spent hours underlining and highlighting and reviewing my books. And now Antioch didn't do tests, and that may have changed how I approached classes if I knew that I was going to be tested. I was not tested. We never had tests. We had homework assignments and we had reflective papers to write, but we didn't have that many tests. And so after a couple quarters, because there was a quarter system, we had 16 quarters or 8 quarters. After a couple quarters, I realized, oh, I'm actually not going to learn how to become a psychotherapist in the classroom. This is just giving me a taster so that when I start sitting in front of people, I don't feel completely incompetent. Now, I've been sitting in front of people since 2010. So you know, I wasn't intimidated by the prospect the way some people are intimidated by the prospect, but you really don't learn in the books. The books give you some theory, the books give you some foundational things, but the bulk of what you learn in grad school is through your clinical training. And that's why finding a good fit, finding a clinic that's going to be a good fit for you is most important. And more important than that, the most important thing that you can get out of grad school is good supervision. Now, the way it works in the state of California, when you're a trainee, when you're in grad school, getting your clinic hours, you have to get 1 hour of supervision for every 5 one-on-one clients you see. 1-to-1, whether that's a family, whether it's a couple, whether it's an individual, it's a 5-to-1 ratio. And usually clinics do group supervision, and that means you have to do 2 hours of group supervision for every 5 hours. Your grad school will highlight all of this for you. You don't have to remember that. But that means that if you're seeing, for example, 10 clients in a week, you have to be in 2 group supervisions. It builds up, as you can imagine. So supervision basically is someone who is licensed, who you work under. You work under their license because you don't have a license. You're a trainee, which means that they can essentially tell you what to do because it's essentially their patient. That means that if anything were to go wrong, it's their license on the board. So you want to be mindful of that, and they are very mindful of that, and they're going to be guiding you into practicing psychotherapy with your patients, given that you're using essentially their license. And so their supervision, the quality of supervision, how those supervisors guide you in thinking about your clients is imperative. And now I get to be a supervisor for coaches. I offer that through my mentorship. And for many people who are thinking about getting their master's, but they're not sure they want to get into $100,000 in debt. That's how much I'm in debt for grad school. The mentorship may be a good place to start, where you can whet your palate, where you can start to see how I think about things a little bit differently, and helping you expand your coaching skill set. Because I don't think it's every coach needs to get their master's. I don't think this is the right track for everybody. And my mentorship, offering supervision to coaches, is a way that I help hold the coaching industry more accountable. And teaching coaches how to deepen their insight and deepen their work without necessarily going back and getting their master's. Supervision is everything. Quality supervision is instrumental in our growth and in our learning. The right supervisor makes all of the difference. And most of the times, my colleagues who are most frustrated, most upset, most infuriated by their clinic experience had 100% to do with their supervisors, not the patients. Good quality supervision is everything. I knew when I was thinking about which clinic I wanted to be a part of that I wanted to do psychodynamic work. And I chose a clinic that was a psychodynamic clinic. All of the supervisors were psychodynamically oriented. And that was the beginning of my clinical training in becoming a more psychodynamic oriented psychotherapist. Yes? Okay. Let me see if there's any other questions that I want to make sure that you all asked me that I addressed. Okay. So how much time did you devote to coursework? About 3 to 4 hours a week. Sometimes more, sometimes less. But once you get into clinical training, grad school kind of just falls away. It just really becomes about getting those hours. How many hours you have to get in order for licensure. This is for MFT. I know the social workers' hours are different, but you have to get, for an MFT licensure, a total of 3,000 hours. 1,350 of those hours can be done in grad school, which means 1,750, I believe I'm doing my math right, can be done outside of grad school, post-grad school. So that's the maximum you can get during grad school is 1,350. I feel like I did that math wrong. Is it 1,650? Or whatever. So that's the max that you can get during grad school. Most people don't get anywhere near that number unless you can commit to this full time. And most people can't, because most people are also in their own careers and getting their, paying their bills. And so I can look at Track Your Hours is the most incredible website that you will ever use. It's called trackyourhours.com. You use it to track all of your hours. Let's see. Okay, I'm sorry. I did the math wrong. It's 1,300 hours max and then 1,700 hours remaining. The max amount of hours you can get during your grad school program is 1,300 hours. And I got 959. And I worked a lot. 20 to 25 hours a week is a lot. I'm a little wild. I went really hardcore. Most people don't get that type of hours. Okay, so let me think if there's anything else. Okay, so 3,000 hours. This is like the big number. This is the number that everyone cares about. 3,000 hours. You have to get 3,000 hours. You can't get it faster than 2 years. So 1 year during grad school, for example, and then 1 year post-grad school. Now, I want to be clear. You don't have to spend a whole year in grad school doing clinic hours. Again, I went above and beyond. Some people only have to do 3 quarters or even 2 quarters of clinic, so 6 months instead of a year. But again, it really depends on how many hours they want to count towards their credits. And this is, I know, a lot. You probably have an advisor in your master's program that you can talk to and decide how you want to situate this. I used my advisor a lot. I used my advisors. Use the resources you have. Don't try to figure it all out on your own. I knew that I wanted to get more clinic hours, and that's why I did a year long, and that's why I maxed out my credits. Some people only have to do it for 6 months, and that can be much more sustainable for people who have full-time jobs. I just squeezed everything in and figured it out. So I got 960 hours during grad school, which means then that whatever 3,000 minus 960 is how many hours hours I have remaining to do in order to be able to finish my hours and apply for licensure. As I'm recording this right now, I have 2,400 hours. So I have 600 hours left. I will be done in October. So in October, I will be done. I will submit my hours, and then I have to wait until the BBS, that's the Board of Behavioral Sciences in the state of California, approves my hours, and then they will let me take the licensure exam. Okay? Wow, this is becoming a long episode. I guess I have a lot to say, huh? Okay. So that was during. Let's talk about now after I graduated. I graduated in March of 2020. My last day of classes was virtual because a week before that, things started to close for the pandemic for 2 weeks to flatten the curve. So our last day of classes was done virtually. 2 years that I spent in the same cohort with 20 people. I did not get to say goodbye to in person. It was really a bummer. But I graduated March of 2020. At that point, once you graduate, you have to keep getting your hours, however many hours you have left. Like I said, I did 960, which means I had however many remaining till I get to 3,000. Now, people do it all differently. Some people look for paid jobs. That's smart when you aren't making money. Maybe you live off of student loans for the 2 years. Once you graduate, you have to submit your paperwork, but you become what's called an associate therapist or an AMFT. And you will maintain your associate status until you become a licensed MFT. As an AMFT, you have now your own little license number. So you still, though, have to be in supervision in order to count your hours. But now the ratio changes. As a trainee, it was 5-1. As an associate, it's now 10-1. So you can do 10 client hours for every 1 hour of supervision or for every 2 hours of group supervision. So that makes it a lot easier. You can see a lot more people now. Because the fastest that you can get all of your hours is 2 years. There's a max amount of hours that you can get post grad. You cannot finish your hours. You have to have 104 weeks of supervision. You can't get it done faster. They want you to really take your time and be in this torturous process. Okay, so once you graduate, you submit your shit, you become an associate. You're now an associate marriage and family therapist. What does that mean? It now means you have to figure out a way to move forward. I know many people chose to either get a job at some type of treatment center or mental health clinic, something so that they can get paid while they get their hours. This is really great. However, because you're an associate, oftentimes you get paid really shitty. I don't know why, because you're not fully licensed yet. It's really a sucky system. I also know people who went and got into a private practice, which means like they run their own business essentially. However, you have to work under someone's supervision. So the way that tends to work is you find a supervisor out in the wild, and they will take like 50% or 40% of your fee that you charge your client as the fee for doing fuck all, for bestowing upon you the opportunity to use their license to practice. They are taking on the risk. I get that. They're taking on the room and board, so to speak. They have to pay for the office, etc. So that gets accounted into it. But it's also astronomical that they take 50% of your fee. So for example, if you charge $100, they take 50. If you have, 10 clients at $100, what's that? $1,000, they take 500 of that simply because you're practicing under their license. It's insane. It's ridiculous. There is a benefit to going to private practice once you become an associate, which is that once then you are done your hours, you can take your clients with you and have already now a little private practice going. If you don't go into okay, so that's if you obviously want to go into private practice. I am not quitting my business. I love my business. This is my baby. I just wanted an additional service to offer in my business. So of course I'm going to go into private practice. That is the ultimate goal. And because I know that, because I already have a coaching private practice, when I graduated, I decided I wanted to stay in a clinic setting. where I was able to get really quality supervision. And I chose a clinic in Los Angeles that also offers psychoanalytic training. So the way my life looks right now, and has looked since October of last year, when I finished my previous clinic and moved into this new clinic, is that I have classes about 6 to 8 hours a week. And then I see about 10 patients a week. And then I have 2 one-on-one supervisors. So you do the math of how many hours that takes up in my week. I love this clinic because it offers this additional training. I did have to pay to be a part of this clinic, and I don't get paid to see my patients. So all of my money comes from my business to support me in my licensure. I'm very lucky that my business is so sustaining that I've built it to the point where it's a well-oiled machine and I'm making consistent 5 figures, even though I'm not necessarily promoting and launching my services all the time. Going to grad school allowed my business to take off. And I think it's because I wasn't so staring at water boiling. Once I was able to turn my attention away, I could only focus on my one signature program and one-on-one coaching. And just recently, this past year, I added my mentorship. But that was the first new offering that I added to my repertoire since I started grad school in 2018. So being in grad school had meant that I had to simplify my business, keep my business super focused so that I could do my clinic work and get through grad school. So Worthy Women Rise, one-on-one coaching, and just now recently my mentorship, that's been it. And that has really helped people to know my services, to know what I offer. It's not confusing, and my business has just blossomed since then. Okay, so that's what my work week looks like now, or my clinic hours look like now. Am I confusing everybody? I feel like I'm just babbling on and on. I guess I have a lot to say about all of this, huh? Let me add a little bit more here and then we'll wrap it up. In case all of this wasn't confusing enough and difficult enough, part of the 3,000 hour requirement is 500 kid or couple hours. That means out of the 3,000, you have to get 500 hours that is solely for the treatment of children and couples. This 500-hour requirement is really hard because most of the time you're not working at a setting where you're only seeing couples. And if you think about how many couples you have to see in a week in order for it to add up to 500 hours is astronomical. A lot of times people do this by being a part of the counseling program at a high school or middle school or elementary school, or they find clinics that have community support for children. I don't want to work with children. And so this was a struggle for me of how do I get this hour when I don't want to do play therapy with a 5-year-old for 2 years? Yes? Luckily, I found something in LA called Teen Line. It's a hotline for teens. They constantly need what they call RAs, which are associate therapists who come and supervise the teens. And I've been a part of that since last March, which if we're keeping up, that means that I do about 2 shifts a week. That's 10 hours a week at Teen Line, plus 2 hour of group supervision, because again, the 10-to-1 ratio. Yes? Are you seeing how wild my schedule is right now? So 6 to 8 hours a week of classes, 10 one-on-one patients, 2 individual supervision, 2 shifts of Teen Line, 2 hours of group supervision for Teen Line, and then my coaching business. That means that I roughly spend about 20 to 30 hours a week in my coaching business and all of that. In order for me to have done all of this, without burning out, which I don't know if I haven't burnt out. I think I have. I think I fluctuate. Is my weekends are sacred. I really don't take on things during my weekends. I really have had to create a boundary where I don't accept any type of work on the weekends, except for my Teen Line shift Sunday nights. And that's how I kind of sustained all of this. It also helps to have a husband who's in the exact same process as you. We often talk about it. He's my rock. having a strong support system is really essential. But also the fact that like I'm just on this continual learning journey has been really supportive for my mental health and for my own well-being. So the 500 kid hours is something for you to be keeping in mind. They're not a joke, and they can, it really is. I've heard horror stories of people who have had, they're done their hours, but they still haven't done their 500 hours. And you, to be an associate, you can be an associate for as long as you need in order to become licensed. But there's something like the max number of years that you can do is 6. And after each year after, you lose a year. There's something like that. It gets complicated. Other thing, part of MFT requirement is 2 quarters of psychotherapy. At that point in time, I'd been working with somebody who was not a licensed psychotherapist in the state of California. So I had to find a therapist in the state of California. And that's when I started something called analysis. Analysis is 4 times a week. I go to therapy 4 times a week. I'm in analysis 4 times a week. And it is at its core a style of treatment, a style of therapy that it is the basis of psychoanalytic psychotherapy. So I'm really in the psychoanalytic world. The clinic that I work at, the classes I take are all very analytic oriented. It's been wonderful to immerse myself in this theory and in this world of seeing patients. Okay. Question I get, am I going to go back and get my PsyD? My $100,000 student loan tells me no. I just don't see the benefit of it right now. It may be a point in the future where I will want to, and I will deal with that when I get there. But right now I'm focused on finishing my hours and paying off my student loans. Yes. I decided to go to another clinic instead of going directly to private practice after I graduated because I didn't need to make money in my psychotherapy. I could focus on learning and growing. That is not always the option for people. Some people just need to make money, and I really get that. Most of my colleagues are in those shoes. When you become an associate, before you renew your associate's number, you have to renew every year. Before you renew it, after year 1, you have to have taken the law and ethics exam. There are 2 exams you required for licensure, the licensure exam and the law and ethics exam. There's a lot. This is a lot. Yes, this is why this episode is turning out to be quite the crazy thing here. I passed the law and ethics exam on my first take, thank God. I studied for about 2 weeks. It was intense, but most people pass if you really give it a go. I studied for a couple hours a day for 2 weeks and 2 whole weekends, and you get through it. Thank God that that's done. Student loans. How do I navigate student loans? Student loans suck. I have $100,000 in debt. And people often think, well, what are you getting? A shiny piece of paper? Like, why even do this? Why even go into all this debt? For what? And here's the thing about getting a master's that I didn't anticipate, but is really, really true, is that the degree isn't about the learning that you get in grad school. Though that's wonderful and great for whatever. I don't really remember what I learned in grad school, to be frank. What you get from this degree are doors opening. And the same can be said for PsyDs. The reason why getting a PhD or a PsyD, people go for it is because more doors open. If you have a doctor in front of your name, right? Like, people see you more as an authority figure. You can't usually teach at higher levels of universities without having a PsyD. Having a degree it opens things. It allows more trainings. It allows more communities. It allows more opportunities that you wouldn't have had before it. And that can be everything for some people. Yeah. But at the end of the day, no degree can replace confidence. I know plenty of people who just keep going after degree, after certification, after certification. They have their master's, they have their PsyD, they're in $500,000 in debt, and they still don't really believe themselves and believe what they charge. And this is what I love about the coaching industry. They teach you pretty early on in the coaching industry that you succeed by having gumption. Yes, that you have to have the confidence. And that confidence doesn't come with a degree. I know plenty of my colleagues who are struggling to promote their private practice, to get their private practice up and running because they don't have the confidence that they can charge what they're, and they're undercharging and overworking. And that doesn't go away just because you have a degree. A degree is not a shiny thing that's going to save you from all of your problems as a coach. It can, in some ways, make it easier, in some ways, make it harder. Because now in the coaching industry, you don't have to have any type of degree to be successful, right? In the world of psychotherapy, the master's is considered like the most basic level. Yes? Nothing is going to save you from the confidence that's required to do that inner work, or the inner work that's required in order for you to have the confidence to promote yourself. There are so many different jobs and professions in the field, and you can look those up. I was never interested in those, so I don't really know much about them, like school counseling, etc. I wanted to go in because I wanted to add, like I said, a job to an offering in my business. And that clarity was also important for me. Okay, almost done here. What I wish I knew. Okay, and tips. Okay, tips and what I wish I knew. The process is extremely transformative, and you don't even know what is going to transform until you're in it. I started grad school at the cusp of my Saturn return, and I swore that nothing was going to change. And by the end of the degree, I have a new partner. I have a totally new understanding of life. I have a new track. I have a new field. I have new friends. I have this just like inner transformation that like you just don't know it's going to happen until it's happened. It's one of the most grueling, intense, extremely painful experiences, and it's also one of the most incredible. I'm so grateful for this experience. I don't regret a single minute of it. And now that I'm almost at the completing end, I'm just so grateful for what I've learned and who I am now because of this experience. Not every supervisor will be a good one. Get yourself a good supervisor. Advocate for the fuck out of yourself to get good supervision. It is the only thing that truly, truly matters outside of your own therapy. Getting your own good supervisor is a game changer. Now, there is a requirement in grad school that you have 2 quarters of psychotherapy. Let me go into this for a minute. I don't believe that you can be a good therapist if you haven't put in hundreds of hours in your own therapy, period. I'm not saying you always have to be in therapy, but you have to be in therapy more than fucking 2 quarters. What is that? 2 quarters, 10 weeks, 20 weeks? You want to be in therapy for 20 weeks and then call yourself a therapist? Like, fuck that. This field makes me so sad by how many therapists aren't in their own therapy. There's so many reasons why you want to be a therapist and be in therapy. Sure, you want to be in your client's shoes. You want to learn the process. It's actually extremely hard for people to find the right fit for a therapist. You going through that process is going to give you some insight and know-how for how to guide your patients through it. That's a given. People say, well, therapists have mental health issues too. And sure, that's great. And going into therapy because of your own mental health issues is perfect and wonderful. Do that, model that, show the world that if there isn't a mental health stigma, then if you have mental health issues, you should be in therapy. If you're a therapist, those are all no-brainers and givens. Here's where it gets, for me, the real crux of why you should be in therapy if you're a therapist. Your greatest skill as a practitioner. I talk about this in my mentorship with my coaching, my coaches, my mentees who are coaches, but this is particularly true in therapy. Your greatest gift, the skill that you have, are your feelings. How you feel, what comes up for you in a session, that information is 100% what will allow you to be a better clinician. Your internal world and how you make sense of your internal world is what will allow you to understand your clients. You've heard the phrase, right? Like, you can only take people as deep as you've gone yourself. That's partially what I'm speaking to. That's another reason. That's important, but it's not just that. There's so much richness in the transference and countertransference that occurs within a therapy dyad. the two of you are communicating on an unconscious level about so many things. And part of what effective therapy looks like is being able to bring the unconscious conscious. And your feelings, your internal world is what helps bring language, brings form to that language. You cannot do this if you're not in your own therapy, supporting yourself and understanding what's going on inside of you. It's, being in analysis, being in therapy 4 times a week, I've learned that I don't go to therapy because I'm broken and need to be fixed. I go into therapy to fine tune my craft, which is me. I am the craft. Therapy is an art, not a science. People can try to make it into a science, but it is inherently an art of 2 people understanding each other and guiding the person through their healing. And we can do that only when we do that ourselves. So I feel like there's so much more I can say on this, but it's, we do therapy as therapists, not just because we want to be mentally tuned, like fine tuning our brain. It's not just that. It's because deepening into ourselves is the art of doing therapy. That's not, again, to say that you always have to be in therapy if you're a therapist, but also yeah. I mean, yes, our brain is our instrument. Don't we want to be in continual attachment and fascination and curiosity about this instrument? My own therapy and good supervision are more important than any book on therapy. Everything I learn about how to do good work with another human, to hold space for another human, has to do with how I understand myself in the world. Period. Point blank. Be in your own therapy. It's the most important thing. And anything else I want to share with you all? This process can be deeply frustrating. These systems are archaic. They're built on capitalism. They're built on white supremacy. It's extremely infuriating how, you really don't make quality money until you become licensed, and how long it takes for you to become licensed, and the accessibility and how inaccessible it can be. And it's really frustrating. And I just have so many feelings about it. And at the end of the day, I'm so glad to be on this journey. I'm so glad to have gone to grad school. It's not the only path. I know plenty of really incredible coaches who don't have a master's and do incredible work. And I also know really, really shitty therapists. So a master's degree isn't going to save you from anything, but it can be a wonderful, wonderful journey if you decide that you want to get a master's in clinical psych or a master's in social work or a PsyD. All of it is going to be so completely transformative. There's so much wisdom, there's so much knowledge in this field that we just don't have access to when we're not in it. And so if you're thinking about it, root in what is true for you, root in what you want. It's never too late to go back to school. I'm turning 32 in a couple of weeks. It's never too late. And start now, do it now, do whatever you need to do now to get yourself on this journey. It's the most incredible journey. And on that note, I'm done. I'm done with the series. I'm done. I'm tired. My throat's tired. I've just been talking so much. I hope this has been useful for all of you. I love hearing from you. So please let me know if this has resonated. Find me on Instagram at I am Thaís. I'm sending you all of my love, and I'll be back next week for a non-therapy conversation. So I will see you then.